Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'm Gokul from the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. The webinar will be beginning in the next few minutes. A predominant number of participants are from South Asia, and we also have participants from other parts of Asia, Europe, North America, and Latin America. The areas of work are spread across different sectors: water, sanitation, public health, gender, across all sectors, and the large majority of people are working with non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations. Okay, so once again, I welcome everybody to today's session. The UN Water Conference brings multiple sectors of the society together to accelerate action towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goal 6. Today's session, Localizing SDGs, Accelerating Urban Wash, Lessons from a Large-Scale Implementation Program in Tamil Nadu, will be anchored by three partners: the Government of Tamil Nadu, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. The state government of Tamil Nadu is on a total sanitation mission as part of its efforts to achieve SDG 6. Its objective is to continue to reduce untreated waste being released into the environment, thereby improving the environment and public health. The Gates Foundation aims to enable the widespread use of safely managed, sustainable sanitation services that contribute to positive health, economic, and gender equality outcomes for the world's poorest people. BMGF collaborates with government leaders and the private sector to advance technologies, equitable service delivery models, and policies at the local and national levels. The Indian Institute for Human Settlements is a practice-based education institution established in 2008. It is committed to the equitable, sustainable, and efficient transformation of Indian settlements. IIHS provides advisory services to the union government, state governments, municipal agencies, international development agencies, private firms, and non-profits in India. On behalf of all these three partners, we would like to thank the United Nations for giving us the opportunity to host this virtual side event. The structure of the session will be as follows. First, the Gates Foundation will make a presentation. This will be followed by a presentation by IIHS. Then we will have the Q&A session. It will present its commitment to the Water Action Agenda. I now request my colleague Anand to introduce the speakers of today's session.
Hello, everyone. We have 5 speakers for the session. We have Mr. Roshan Shrestha with us. He's the Deputy Director, Water Sanitation and Hygiene at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He leads the efforts to promote urban sanitation markets and for building municipal capacity to manage sustainable sanitation systems. We have Kavita Vankate also with us. She's the head of practice at Indian Institute for Human Settlements. She has worked extensively in the water and sanitation sector with a focus on service delivery and advocate for inclusive planning in recent years. Kavita has focused on the well-being of sanitation workers and strengthening women professionals in sanitation. Santosh Raghavan is an environmental health and engineering professional with over 2 decades of experience. He is a senior lead at Indian Institute for Human Settlements and currently leads the Tamil Nadu Urban Sanitation Support Program. Niladri Chakraborty is presently leading the citywide inclusive sanitation program in Trichy city in Indian state of Tamil Nadu. He is a development professional with more than 19 years of experience in wash and public health. Mahima Vijendra. She is a senior consultant at Indian Institute for Human Settlements. She has a multidisciplinary background in planning and environmental policy and has previously worked in several consulting roles both in the UK and India. As part of the Tamil Nadu Urban Sanitation Support Program, Mahima's role has focused on institutional strengthening. Over to you, Gokul.
Thank you, Anand. So before we begin our presentation, I would like to inform all our participants that the chat box is disabled. If you have any questions for the panel, you may post them under the Q&A tab, and we will address them at the end of the session when we move to the Q&A section. So the first presentation will be by Roshan from BNGF. Over to you, Roshan.
Thank you, Gokul. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are listening this session. So happy that IIHS organized this very useful, very important issue that you are discussing about localized sustainable development goal, especially focus on the sanitation. So we all know that the sanitation is very, very lagging behind. 3.5 billion population, more than 3.5 billion population still lacks of safely managed sanitation services. And then also, if you see the global disparity, like the still global South, especially Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, is even lagging behind a lot. Similarly, if you see that at the country-wide as well, there is disparity between country to country. Even these two regions, that you can see a lot of disparity among the countries, and at the same time within the country also there are big disparity. Like a lot of poor people still not really having the access to services. So one hand we have this equitable distribution is a big issue. Safety is a big issue, as well as now again we come up with the climate agenda. Now the water scarcity is now one of the big problems going to happen because of the climate problem in the world. So a lot of issues are there, and this is very much connected to the even the health. A lot of waterborne disease, all is still not really controlled, and so many different types of diseases are coming up. All those things are linked to the sanitation, and unfortunately, even having all these things, only WASP professionals, and they talk about sanitation issues, but still, this is not really becoming a really big agenda, even having all these problems. So how can we bring the sanitation agenda forward? This is one of the issues that we really need to address. When you read a lot of this climate agenda in the climate adaptation issues, when we talk about this very much less information about the mitigation and adaptation related to the sanitation, we really can't see much. So that's why now we really need to bring this agenda forward. And a couple of countries in the past really moving forward very, very much fast. Like the country like India, they have come up with such a big mission for the improvement sanitation entire pan-India, such a large country. Similarly, China is also moving forward the same direction. But still, many other small countries in island, small island countries, still they are not really moving forward on that. We need to do a lot of work to really bring this agenda forward. And for this now, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we are working in this sector since last more than a decade, maybe about in the very much focus on sanitation since last 12 years. We are working very, very deeply on that. And one of the issues that what we realized that where to address on sanitation, because when we talk about sanitation, people immediately think about the pit latrine, septic tank, or sewer system, all those things. And they really, the issues of how to really address sanitation was not really addressed when we started the work. Then we talked, when we did analysis, then we realized that the non-sewer sanitation is one of the major issues that we really need to tackle. That's why we focus on non-sewer sanitation, how to bring this agenda forward, because when we talk about non-sewer sanitation, really it will also help to address the equitable issues, like a lot of poor people who are living there, they're really relying on non-sewer system, as well as if you even globally, if you see that non-sewer sanitation is dominated and the sewer system is very, very much less. For that, we need to come up with some innovative ideas to address that. That's why we are investing quite a lot of resources for the inventing the new technologies. For example, all of you, maybe a lot of people in the, especially in the sanitation sector, they must be hear about the reinventing toilet program that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is working on. And many technologies are very much on mature stage, and they will be in the ground, in the market in next couple of years. But we really need to ready for that, how to really deploy those technologies, how to really adopt that technology in the countries. We need to really still work hard, and we really need to support from all over the world and development partners and the government as well. And at the same time, when we talk about technology is one hand, but they also need to have a strong enabling environment need to be created. And especially when we address in the cities, because now problem is more we can see in the city. That's why our focus in urban sanitation. And where that's why we are talking about citywide inclusive sanitation is one of the agenda that what we are bringing out. And this is and we also come up with some kind of the framework to implement citywide inclusive sanitation. That framework actually addressed that how public institutions to be accountable for the sanitation service. how they can really provide services to the really at the equitable level that poor can also have access to services. And what kind of institutional system need to be improved for that? What kind of accountability mechanism need to improve or establish in the country? All those framework we talk about under citywide inclusive sanitation, we call CUIs. And at the same time, to address this citywide inclusive sanitation as well as deployment of the innovative science technology, we need to work on the couple of the countries, and we can't really work on globally, but we need to find some countries where we can really demonstrate, where we can deeply engage with the government, private sector, development partners, and then we can showcase that those results. For that, we are working with a couple of countries in the global south, and one of the countries, of course, India is one of the countries where we deeply involved there. And since last 7-8 years, we are deeply involved in this country, and even in that country, we can't really, like when we work in India, we can't work in pan India. So we need to select again a couple of countries, couple of states where we can demonstrate that. Then we pick up the Tamil Nadu is one of the states out of a couple of states in India where we are working, and Tamil Nadu is one of the states where we are deeply involved since last 7-8 years, and very closely working with the partner like our IIHS is one of the partner who are really convening of this session, and then the government of Tamil Nadu is also one of our partner, and working with government of Tamil Nadu, and then the engaging technical partner like IIHS, and IIHS also engaged so many local partners in Tamil Nadu, and then really it's like a model like the multi-partnership program together with government of Tamil Nadu, and demonstrate some good cases, especially on the how to really reach to the poor, the sanitation services. And we, as IIHS and the government of Tamil Nadu, also established a citywide inclusive sanitation city, a Trichy, where they have demonstrated so many interesting cases, how to work with the city authority, how to work with the poor communities, how to work with the women group. So all those models they have established. At the same time, IIHS has also demonstrated a very interesting treatment system for fecal sludge management, treatment as well as management and financing model. All they have really demonstrated very nicely. We are very proud of working with the IIHS to showcase so many interesting cases. I'm sure our colleague Santosh, Kavita, and our colleague will be talking about what they achieved in Tamil Nadu in last 5 years time, and how much resources they were able to generate from the public sector, like how government are now accountable to provide safely managed sanitation services to entire Tamil Nadu is one of the, I would say, one of the model for the other country as well, because Tamil Nadu itself, if you see the population size and the geography, all those things, you can consider Tamil Nadu as one country, and that can be really replicable. If we can make this success in Tamil Nadu, that can be replicable to many other countries in the South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So this is very interesting model that I'm sure you will be enjoying learning from our colleague from IIHS. And one other thing is like when we talk about all these, the issues on sanitation, I really inspired by the recently published one paper by UN Economic and Social Council, and they just published one paper on water and sanitation on 16 January 2023, just recently, a couple of 2 months back. And that paper is really great paper that it really addresses all the issues what we were talking about. They're talking about the innovative, transformative sanitation technology, service provision, everything, climate issues, that I really encourage all colleagues to read that paper. That is really a good paper to really educate to the high-level political officials, political leaders, government officials, and as well as all the sector to work on. So I don't have much to say now, because better to listen from the colleague from IIHS. And one more thing that what we are working on, that working in this country state like in Tamil Nadu, bringing all knowledge and practices, and that we need to scale that. The scaling is actually we are working also with the international financing institution like World Bank, ADB, and several banks, as well as development partners like the UNICEF and the UN Habitat, WHO, all our partners to working together to really scale this model that what we have established, what our partners and the government have established, that will be scaled globally. Thank you so much for listening, and looking forward to hearing from IIHS colleague. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshan. Thank you for sharing your insights. I will begin with a short audience interaction form. The details to access the form will appear on the chat window. We request all of you participants to please, participate in the interaction. You can also scan the QR code to access the form. I request all from here. Over to you, Santosh.
Okay, so as we see the poll results, so some of the key challenges that are highlighted, of course, the one which is prominently visible to us is the open disposal of the waste. And then now it's followed by how do we finance whatever interventions that we are planning. And then now it's going into many of the related challenges, and it's difficult for me to read also now. So that's the complexity of sanitation related challenges that we are talking about. So treatment of waste, water availability, segregation of waste, dehumanization, behavior change. So yes, I think let's pick this up as we start discussing. So some of the key challenges that were highlighted is what the program like TNUSSP is trying to address. And now we have the next question. So it's about what are the key strengths along the sanitation chain in your context, where you come from. Because it's also important to understand the strengths. So it's important for us to build on the existing strengths. So thriving private sector, NGO participation, government funding, all very important. And you see, as we describe the program impact per se, they were built on these kind of strengths. What are being highlighted is government buy-in is very important. So working with government is an interesting approach, and also it's being highlighted as a strength. We have different stakeholders, many players in the sector per se. And policy, yes, right. So we see that in the past few years, countries like India have made substantial improvement changes in the policy, the way we look at, right? So culture, regulations, team is very important, yes, and terrain. So some terrains are, in a way, they help us and build on what opportunities terrain provide. Okay, thank you. I think we will move on to the next one. So I will briefly start with context setting. So, and my colleagues will try to build on and then describe what we have done under TNUSSP. So I will do this in probably two parts. So first, I will probably start with the status of urban sanitation per se. So the chart to my left broadly highlights that access is limited, especially in the low and medium income countries. But more importantly, we see that there is a substantial shift that is needed from right to left. So what is important is it's not only access, it is also how safe the full cycle of sanitation is. And for us to shift from right to left, programs like this, we are hoping that will be useful for us to kind of bring in this change quickly. So programs like Tamil Nadu Urban Sanitation Support Program could help us to achieve these things in a very probably a rapid manner. So that's one part. The second message is that if you look at low and medium income countries, so the sanitation situation is typically that we still are dependent on on-site systems. Say the urban India data, what you see, nearly 50% of urban India is dependent on on-site system. So the high dependency, in a way, there is a need for us to kind of build on what exists and then improve so that we accelerate the goals around sanitation. So that's the key message. So in a way, the pie chart typifies what exactly is there in the high and medium and low income countries. So this change is what is the program broadly talks about and how this can be brought in a very short time period. So that's the key message here. And probably from here on, if we move to the next slide, so which broadly talks about evolution of sanitation at the national level. So if you look at in say early 2000, 2005, so we still were focusing on sewage sanitation, that is network sanitation was one of the key whatever interventions that were planned to kind of provide or improve sanitation. So, but if you look at 2008, when the National Urban Sanitation Policy was introduced, it also gave impetus on non-sewage sanitation, that is on-site systems and FSM. So that's one of the key change, and this was followed by a government advisory on how one can improve on-site systems and FSMs, which was I think issued in the year 2009. Some states like Tamil Nadu, and I would like to call out this specifically. So in 2014, Tamil Nadu was the first state to introduce operative guidelines for managing on-site systems and fecal sludge management. And in a way, it preceded even the SBM. But largely in the first phase of the SBM, so the focus was primarily on improving access. So, but that also recognized the importance of sanitation. So it helped several states to kind of get sanitation as one of the key priority areas to work on. And then this followed by national policy on fecal sludge and septage management, which many states have adopted. And then now we are in a stage where FSM is integrated into flagships program like Swachh Bharat and also Amrit. So this is the key thing. So the way, if you look at the time scale, roughly in 15 years, so there is a recognition of non-sewage sanitation and FSM per se, and then there are also policy interventions, plus also there is a substantial implementation focus. And then where we are now is something which is very interesting, and states like Tamil Nadu have substantially progressed on these things. But it's also important to highlight that in a country like India, so we have three levels of administration. So one, of course, at the center, so which in a way influences the way funding is, and also it substantially supports on communication about these things. Whereas at the state level, sanitation is a state subject. So at the state scale, it's important for us to see what are the key things that the state prioritizes and how it plans its implementation. But ultimately, the local government, which is urban local authorities or rural local authorities, they are the ones who are responsible for implementation and sustaining these changes on ground. Next one, please. I'll just briefly tell you what Tamil Nadu is all about, and it's not very different on sanitation systems per se, but just to give you a scale of what Tamil Nadu state per se is. I mean, roughly, if you look at the total population, it is at one third of what Brazil is. So that's the scale that we're talking about. Similarly, it is somewhat similar to the population of Thailand. And also it is, the size is similar to Tanzania or South Africa. So that's the scale that we're talking about. And we have roughly an urban population of around 30 million. I mean, now this is a 2011 data. I mean, we don't have the latest census data, but it is around 32 to 35 million now. So 50% is urban and 50% is rural. That's the rough distribution. But if you look at the urban distribution of sanitation per se, so there is a bulk of it relies on on-site system, and nearly 2/3 of it is dependent on on-site system. So that's why it's important for us to kind of, if we were to kind of achieve some of the sanitation related goals, it's important for us to build on what we have and then kind of bring in those improvements. And that's what the program has in a way tried doing that. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So the overall sanitation context. So when we started this program, which was in 2016, so this is the broad situation. So broadly, one is to look at the full cycle of sanitation from access to reuse or disposal. That's the key thing. And what do we have now? So, and also we have another slide which describes where we are now in 2022. So that probably will come at some point, but please look at these key things. And also this is at the state scale, which is very important for us to kind of think through and plan. So at what scale you are looking at, right? So one is that most of the majority of the population had access to toilets. So that's why this program primarily focuses on what happens after flushing. So it's important for us to kind of address those things also when we're talking about full cycle. It's not only about access. In a way, the program did not work too much on access per se. I mean, you might be wondering why we are talking about only FSM. And FSM, what it means is it's not only about fecal sludge management per se, it also looks at the full cycle, including containment, collection and conveyance, and then treatment and reuse of fecal sludge. So that's the way it is. So, I mean, I need not have to kind of describe what the context is, but some of the whatever weaknesses that we had, I'd like to highlight, right? So when it comes to access, there is equity related issues, especially for the urban poor. So that's one thing which we tried addressing under this program. And also when we talk about on-site system, so we have non-standard systems, which is a substantial thing. So if we were to kind of address the full cycle, so it starts from how does one improve on-site systems. That's one of the key challenges that we faced. Though we had a fairly market-led collection and conveyance system, so the disposal was fairly unregulated. And it was also the way the entire ecosystem operated. So there were substantial challenges around health and safety of the people involved in service provision. And also in terms of treatment and reuse of the waste. So we didn't have adequate treatment facilities per se, though there were, but there isn't enough. So this is the broad situation, and we'll see where we are in terms of these conditions in 2022 in a later slide. So can we move on to the next one, please? So now, if just for the purpose of what Roshan said, so TNUSSP is largely a partner-led program. So if you're talking about state scale, so of course, GOT, Government of Tamil Nadu, is one of the key partners in this journey. And apart from that, the foundation is been supporting this program for almost 7 years now. So we had created a technical support unit, which comprised of partners, and IIHS led this TSU. And then the focus was primarily, when the initial part of the program started, was primarily on scaling FSM. And also it involved other stakeholders, which is largely your civil society and non-government and private sector players and communities and all of that. But more importantly, the interventions were focused on different multiple forms of intervention to address whatever challenges that we had. If you look at the kind of partners we had, so in a way, there are many areas of work that one has to kind of complement each other. So that is something which is very important. And if you were to scale something, so through partners is one of the ways with which one can scale. So these are the two key messages that the program would like to kind of highlight. Move on to the next slide, please. So how the program originated per se. So if you go back and then see how sanitation has evolved in India per se. So Tamil Nadu was the first state which recognized that if we were to provide sanitation for everybody, so it's not possible for us to kind of achieve this goal through sewerage systems only. So that's a key change. That's very important. And it recognized that on-site systems and FSM, it could complement in certain locations, right? So in large urban areas, even in a place like, say, large cities like Chennai, so there are certain pockets which still are dependent on on-site systems, especially the urban poor locations. So one is certain locations, on-site system and FSM can complement this other forms of sanitation, including sewerage systems, right? So, and for certain locations, so this could be one of the key solution per se. I mean, this is the standalone solution. That's the key recognition from the government of India, and that led to kind of see and explore how FSM can be scaled within the state. And thanks to BMGF, which also had interest and also wanted to kind of demonstrate this at scale. I mean, prior to this, we had a very small number of examples, and that too, they were not at this scale. For example, Malaysia had done substantial work on FSM, but within an Indian context, plus at this scale, there weren't many good examples. And more importantly, FSM is seen as a temporary solution, right? So both, though on-site system is predominant, FSM is definitely seen as a temporary solution, and that mindset is what one has to kind of change. So that's the basic premise on which this program has started. Next slide, please. So then, given this context, and this is how we had started, and I mean, this was highlighted fairly well when we were asking about what are the challenges, right? So one other thing is that open disposal of waste, whether it's through on-site systems or when you want to kind of desludge these wastes from on-site systems and dispose. So the overall outcome is to kind of minimize untreated waste getting into the environment. And then we have innovations which have to be demonstrated. I mean, somehow we think in terms of pilots per se, innovations demonstration is important. And more importantly, the initiations have to be in multiple forms, right? It's not necessarily about building infrastructure, but it has to focus on how do we run. And for running and maintaining this, it's also important for us to have what institutional capacities are needed, what enablers on the policy and the regulation sides are needed. And this is, of course, a multi-stakeholder engagement process. And equally important is to kind of generate awareness around some of these key issues. And also Roshan highlighted that currently professionals talk about this, but it has to penetrate, and then common people should start talking about it. These were some of the key outcomes and the strategy that the program has adopted, and the details will definitely, my colleagues will describe. Move on to the next, please. And the other important point when we're talking about state scale, we need to understand what is happening on ground, and also are we understanding from right locations. So in a way, broadly, the state has two types of urban locations. One, of course, is a large city, which is probably partially sewered, and also in a way, it presents certain challenges which are unique, even in terms of managing FSM per se. The other ones are like smaller towns, which are very unlikely to get sewerage-based solutions, and also they are not densely populated. So for which we can look at FSM and on-site system as a predominant solution. So that's at the city level. It's also important for us to understand what is happening on ground, and also devise solutions. And then if needed, you demonstrate, and demonstrate need not necessarily be physical, but at the same time, we also have to work at the state level. So this is a two-pronged approach which worked fairly well in our program. And some of the initiatives will be discussed at length later. Next slide, please. So this is the thing that I started when we started in 2016 and where we are now, right? So some of the impact of TNUSSP are highlighted, but broadly what I would like to say is it's important for us to bring in system changes and transformation. That's what is the middle line, which talks about institutional strengthening, governance, right, and also ecosystem, capacity, all of this. So this change has led to some of the outcomes which you're talking about. So for urban poor, the access has been improved, and also the full cycle of sanitation for, say, large community and public toilets. So there is a substantial change in that. Similarly, at the individual household level, so we are trying to improve on-site systems and also try and enable certain operational measures. And also we have adopted some of the measures around collection and conveyance, including light touch regulation model for privately operated systems. All of this, we will get into that a little later. But more importantly, these are all kind of linked. I mean, the outcomes are definitely linked to the other other related sectors. For example, water is inherently part of this, right? So, and also gender. So substantial workforce, especially at the lower level. So it is all women who are providing services. So those are some of the key things which you will see and hear from my other colleagues. I'll stop at this and then I will request my colleague Niladri to kind of pick up from here.
Thank you, Santosh. I will, for setting the context so nicely, I will take a couple of cues from you to take this session forward. And I'll be talking about a couple of key strategies which proved to be very instrumental for the current shape and size of this TNUSSP. The next slide, please. So I'll be talking, starting with enabling state investment sanitation. So can I get the next slide? So before jumping into that, I would also love to share the little bit the early approaches. I mean, at the very initial stage, because when we are talking about state investment plan, you can understand we are talking mostly about the finance, and which came out as one of the very significant point in our mentee. But before that, how this entire enabling system, how the interstate was enabled, that is the highlight. So it started with, I would say, building credibility for the FSM. And as you know, the saying is believing. At the early stages, the top brushes of different key department of the Tamil Nadu, they visited multiple state, other countries where such non-sewer sanitation solutions are working on the ground. So that kind of cross-learning actually gave them certain degree of confidence, and eventually champions from them evolved. In parallel, I would also like to highlight certain governance structure, which actually help to take this entire agenda of urban sanitation reform and TNUSSP forward. That is having a structure called advisory committee at the state level, which is led by the top-notch principal secretary and other key officials from all the relevant departments, as well as having working group committee at the city levels. This kind of governance structure, and of course, where IIHS being the key partner of the technical support unit was, and other partners was there. So this kind of comprehensive governance structure actually helped to distribute the onus, and of course, it helped in many ways to take that development, take that thing in a fast track, and it proved to be a very good strategy in a fair communication channel between the state and cities, I would say. So these are the enabling, the way states slowly enabled towards that. Now, next slide. Yeah, now if we look at the state investment plan, when the government of Tamil Nadu was convinced that FSM non-sewer sanitation solution is a fairly scientific solution, and they are going to incorporate that in their entire agenda of reforming urban sanitation, they made a smart move. And they had a very clear agenda or clear mandate in a staggered way, in a phased manner, as Santosh said, the state is having 600 plus urban local bodies. So in a staggered manner, they will cover all the urban local bodies with the treatment facility. And to doing that, they did some very smart job. They prepared this state investment plan. They just did not jump into constructing very capex heavy treatment facilities initially. They did some introspection. They look into what kind of treatment facility already existing and which treatment facilities are not fully being utilized for multiple reasons. So then phase-wise first, that co-treatment was endorsed very much so that optimum utilization of those resources can be done. And subsequently, the STP, which was in the pipeline, that was also designed like that. So they can also be utilized for the co-treatment. And eventually, the more decentralized FICA treatment plant was constructed. So you can see in the matrix how the phase-wise things was designed. And almost 30 million USD was parked to cover the entire thing. The objective was that entire thing, all the ULB will be covered in a certain period of time. And the master stroke was the cluster approach. I will say a little bit more in the subsequent slides. Next slide, please. So if you look at the map, you can get an idea how stage-wise the entire state will be covered by the treatment facility and the cluster, where one ULB will be having the treatment facility, whether it may be a co-treatment cluster. In case of the host, you will be having an STP, or it may be an FSTP cluster. And surrounding urban local bodies will be clustered with that, so that the resource or the treatment facilities can be shared. And subsequently, in phase-wise manner, the entire state will be covered with this treatment facility. And if you meticulously notice at the last map, you will actually see that now state has initiated clustering with the rural local bodies. So saturating urban state is also going into that direction as well. Next slide, please. So this slide will give me an more opportunity to spot more light on the cluster approach. So yeah, I believe by that time you got an idea what I'm trying to convey in clustering. So basically, large cities and medium clustered cities were clustered around the ULB, where the treatment facilities are located. But while doing that, always the distance was tried to keep in 10 kilometers, but this is not a magic figure. The objective was that the transport of the trucks can be optimized. So in this approach, actually solving two problems. One way, it is actually a way to showing the optimal utilization of resources, where the treatment facilities being utilized by multiple, being shared. On the flip side, since the trucks are also getting disposal facility in their desired distance, so eventually the unsafe disposal also can be avoided. And through the government order and subsequent bylaws, this entire approach has been institutionalized. Next slide, please. Now I'll be talking to the other important strategy which proved very instrumental in this entire TNUSSP journey, that is addressing challenges along the cycle, full cycle of the sanitation. Next slide. So as you know, sanitation is not just the toilet or not just the treatment, it is the full chain. But normally we notice that the treatment part or the toilet part, they attract more attention. But if all the challenges across the chain is not addressed, then it is very difficult to solve the problem of sanitation, and especially more precisely in the urban sanitation, which is even more complex. So in this program, TNUSSP, actually the effort was put to try to address along the value chain. And if I start from the treatment, already I mentioned what state did. State has endorsed highly on the co-treatment so that resource can be utilized. In parallel, of course, FSTP was also constructed, and its operation management was also involved. So co-treatment and FSTP, both things was adopted to solve the problem of the treatment side. Next slide, please. Now moving to the next part of the chain, as you know, which is collection and conveyance. So what before discussing what was the intervention, I would like to share what is on the ground in the Tamil Nadu. So Tamil Nadu is not an exception, like any other part of the Tamil Nadu, on the India. And as Santosh said, predominantly here people are relying on the on-site system. And of course, the containments are mostly, you'll find it is not standard as per, it is sometime oversized, sometime undersized. That situation is there. But Tamil Nadu is also a state which is having a big thriving market of the private sector dislodging operators. And it is, I would say, almost decades they are operating in the states. And eventually there was a prevalence of unsafe disposal as well. So when strengthening this section or attending the challenges of this section, first government adopted, or I would say leveraged the existing private sector market but with a soft touch regulation. It was never heavily regulated, but soft touch regulation was introduced so that the unsafe disposal can be avoided. So licensing was introduced, GPS thing is being now introduced little bit. So all these things are getting slowly introduced, but the fees, etc., always kept very nominal. Along with that, and considering the urban poor, keeping their thing in the mind, some other thing also tried at the state. For an example, improving the on-site system. In a subsequent slide, I'll talk more about that. But if the urban poor can get some affordable or some the emptying service at a discounted rate, is it possible? So with the existing market, it was tried. When it did not work, the alternative was tried with the urban local body. Also, we found a major number of the urban poor people rely on the on-site sanitation system, on the community toilet. So periodic dislodging of that kind of community toilet was also endorsed so that sanitation service delivery remained uninterrupted, especially for the urban poor thing. Now, coming to the next slide. This slide is about the improving the on-site sanitation system. So the containment, which actually, because of it properly constructed, should be a magic box with this potentiality to remove pollution, etc. But for multiple reasons, it became a kind of black box. So, but this program, effort was put, sincere effort to address the challenges with the on-site system, especially the containment side. And at the household level, technology was demonstrated affordably how the existing or legacy structure can be renovated, and as well as at the community toilet, public toilet level also demonstration was done, and successfully scaling up has been also initiated through the government system. In parallel, the existing building bylaw enforcement also being tried, especially for the new building and especially for the bulk generator. So with this, I think I have finished describing the two key strategies. And two more strategies. Here I will stop and I'll hand over to my colleague Mahima to take you through. Thank you.
Thank you, Niladri. So what I'll be covering next is essentially some of the cross-cutting themes and the work that we're doing across these themes. And I'll begin with the institutional strengthening work that the program has been involved in. Next slide, please. So one of the key things that was done at the start of the program was to actually do extensive baseline and situational assessments. And this was really important to get an understanding of the sanitation context in the state. And this also included mapping out the landscape for the legal, regulatory, and the institutional setup for water and sanitation. And what this exercise showed us that there was a fairly complex and fragmented institutional setup. You can see in this table here, please ignore the acronym. Illustrate that there were a number of agencies, number of departments across various levels of the government that have involved the different stages of water and sanitation infrastructure and service delivery. And it was really important for us to understand this, as it was within this framework that the program institutionalized the institutionalized FSM. Next slide, please. So the approach that that was taken was essentially to build or rather address gaps that were there. So we had the operative guidelines that was providing a broad guidance on septage management right from 2014, but there were gaps that needed to be addressed. And the entire legal and regulatory framework, particularly for FSM, needed to be strengthened. So what the program did was actually introduce new governance mechanisms and also strengthen existing ones to ensure that challenges and gaps that were not allowing for the cycle of sanitation to function properly and adequately would be addressed. So for example, here, the Tamil Nadu Combined Development and Building rules were strengthened to ensure that containment systems would be built as per design and to standards. On the other end of the spectrum, in terms of treatment, for example, as new treatment facilities were being built or existing ones being upgraded, the cluster approach that was adopted for the the use of shared treatment facilities, there was a need to introduce new governance mechanisms that would facilitate the sharing of these treatment facilities between urban local bodies. So a memorandum of understanding was developed, and this provided a framework by which the operation and maintenance of these shared treatment facilities would be governed. It more importantly allowed for a way by which the costs of operating and maintaining the treatment facilities could be shared, and this ensured that the financial sustainabilities of these treatment facilities could be ensured. Similarly, as Niladri had mentioned earlier, there was the issue to address the issue of open disposal and an unregulated private sector. A standard licensing agreement was introduced, and this has now been adopted across the state. These mechanisms have been adopted across the state. So while there have been these interventions for particular aspects of the sanitation chain to address particular challenges to strengthen the institutional and the regulatory framework for components of the sanitation chain, more recently, the approach has been more comprehensive. So we had the government last year recognize that FSM is integral to urban sanitation, and so an FSSM chapter was introduced into the municipal act. So they were amended to incorporate this chapter, and additionally, the operative guidelines were also revised to take on board lessons and experiences that were coming from the ground, but also to make it more inclusive and ensure that these guidelines were providing I think I muted myself there. So what I was trying to say is these guidelines provided urban local bodies ways by which to look beyond just infrastructure and also address service delivery. Next slide, please. So while the previous slide showed that there were different points in time when these different mechanisms were introduced, the operationalization of those mechanisms have not been as sequential. They are happening in parallel, they're ongoing, and there are a number of additional initiatives that are needed to ensure that these mechanisms are operational on the ground and are implemented fully. So what has it taken? What is it taking for these governance mechanisms to be operationalized? So while the government order was issued for Memorandum of Understanding and the Standard Licensing Agreement, the government order was issued nearly 3 years ago. Subsequently, there was an update to the bylaws for septage management, and this was needed to ensure that there is a legal backing for the implementation of these mechanisms. And since then, there have been directives that are being issued regularly from the state level to the urban local bodies to operationalize these mechanisms. And in parallel, the program has been providing support to the officers at the ground level to ensure that they understand what needs to be done, how these mechanisms can be operationalized and need to be implemented, providing hand-holding support for that. And as FSM is being expanded by the state to cover rural local bodies, the mechanisms have to be revised. And they also need to take on board the amendments that have come. They have to align with the amendments that have come into the acts more recently. Can we move to the next slide, please? So given that it was decided that FSM is going to be integrated into the existing government framework, what was needed was to understand or rather map out all the key FSM processes, roles and responsibilities that would be needed for the implementation to happen at the ground level, at the local government level, especially since a majority of the implementation was being led by the urban local bodies. This table is a snapshot of all these processes that were mapped out, the roles that the ULB had to perform to ensure that the FSM is being implemented and operationalized. And it also kind of highlighted the engagement from the private sector, or rather the role that the private sector would provide in particular service infrastructure or service delivery. So this was really key to map out these different roles and responsibilities, especially as part of institutionalizing FSM at the local level. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So along with the institutionalization, the program has also focused on monitoring. And for this, an IT backbone system has been developed. It has a number of components that are mainly focused on tracking both the desludging services as well as the FSTP performance as these systems, as these plants are being built and operationalized. So these are the two key components that are part of the institutional strengthening that the program has been involved in. Can we move on? So we will now focus on the other two areas that are cross-cutting, which is capacity development and behavior change. And one thing to highlight here is that the program recognized fairly early on that capacity development or capacity building is an important complement to the institutionalization, and a number of stakeholders, both public and private, have been engaged and they're incapacitated for improved service delivery. And while training and orientation have been the usual methods that have been adopted for capacity building, the program also used different modes such as digital learning materials. And one example to get into is the roving support that is being provided by the program as part of the implementation and operationalization of both the treatment facilities as well as the governance mechanisms. So I'll just get into this a little bit to just say that what the program has done is deployed small teams in the field who are able to reach out to numerous urban local bodies, helping government officers understand what needs to be done in terms of implementation, whether it is as part of constructing FSTPs, the operation and maintenance, or whether to do with the institutionalization of the governance mechanisms that I just mentioned. So they have been providing this troubleshooting support, and it's an important way by which capacity is being developed at the ground level. Next slide, please. So along with capacity development, I think it's one of the other key things that the program has been doing is to bring to the fore voices of many stakeholders who are often invisible and ignored. And as part of this, the program has developed a multi-part seminar series where a variety of sanitation workers have been enabled to voice their challenges, speak about their journeys and their lived experiences. Now, this particular seminar series that the program has been involved in is part of a much larger body of work that the program has been involved in around inclusion, and particularly with sanitation workers, where we are focused on improving their health and safety as well as welfare. And similarly, the program is also working around in the area of gender. The interventions here include, working with women sanitation professionals. Again, in this male-dominated sort of sector, they're often ignored, their voices aren't heard. So the program has developed a campaign, a Women in Sanitation campaign, where women professionals from across the, from different parts of the sanitation chain, from public and private sector, their stories are highlighted, they're celebrated, and their voices are brought to the fore. So through the campaigns, now nearly 40 plus women and trans women stories have been featured. Next slide, please. So despite all this work that the program has been involved in, there is still a taboo around sanitation that needs to be addressed and broken. And for this, the program has done some formative research and developed a mascot-led behavior change campaign. And the aim of this campaign is to communicate to the public the concept of sanitation and FSM through very simple messages. And it is a call to action to the public to improve practices on the ground, especially around things like desludging. And so this campaign is currently being rolled out, and we have a short video clip here that we would like to show. But before we get to that, I just want to wrap up to say this campaign is also been quite critical in breaking. We see this as being quite critical in breaking the taboo and starting conversations around sanitation. So with that, we will end this presentation and show you the short clip on the Kakaman campaign.
Hello, Nadu, Kakaman. Ponnu porula settu vachi enni settu vachi ennaya settu vacha simane. Nada, Kakaman. Sinivasan, suttam pochi, septic tank asalukku pochi. Sinivasan, suttam pochi, serichadella asalai pochi. உங்களுக்கு என்னடா குறை வச்சேன்? வெட்ட வெளியில போனா வெக்க கேடுன்னு வீட்டுக்குள்ளே டாய்லெட் கட்டி வச்சேன். நீங்களா போய் தங்கறதுக்கு செப்டிக் டேங்க் கட்டி வச்சிருக்கேன். வேற என்னடா பண்றது? செப்டிக் டேங்க் கட்டி சோலை எல்லாம் முடிச்சு சுகமா இருந்தீங்களே. வருஷம் ரெண்டும் ஆற பின்னு வண்டி ஏத்தி அனுப்பி வைக்க மறந்து போனீங்களே. அடித்தடாமும் கட்டாம பக்கவாட்டும் பூசாம அம்போன்னு விட்டீங்க, அம்பான்னு விட்டீங்க. மண்ணை தோண்டி உள்ள போய் தண்ணிக்குள்ள தத்தளிச்சு தாவி வீட்டுக்குள்ள வந்தீங்க. உங்களை இப்பவே அப்புறப்படுத்துறேன்டா. ஹலோ
வாங்க, ஏறுங்க. விடமாட்டேன்.
தடுக்கிறீங்க.
அந்த டிரைவர் எங்களை கண்ட இடத்துல கொட்டுறாரு. அதுக்கப்புறம் நாங்க மண்ணுக்குள்ள புகுந்து நிலத்தடி நீர்ல கலந்து மறுபடியும் உங்க வீட்டுக்கே வந்துருவோம்.
சுட சுட சோறாக்கி காய் போட்டு குழம்பு வச்சு கூட்டு வச்சு பொரியல் வச்சு வாயில வச்சு சாப்பிடுறது என்ன தெரியுமா? டிரைவர் வண்டி எடு.
ஆமா, நம்ம எதுக்கு இங்க வந்திருக்கோம்?
வெட்ட வெளியில கொட்டினா தானே பிரச்சனை. தோட்டத்துல கொட்டினா தோட்டத்துக்கு உரமா தானே போங்க.
மறுபடியும் தோட்ட வேலை செய்யறதுக்கு நீங்க தோட்டத்துக்கு தானே வரணும். எங்களை தொட்டு மிதிச்சு தானே வேலை செய்யணும். அப்போ நாங்க உங்க கைகள்லயும் கால்கள்லயும் தொத்திக்கிட்டு மறுபடியும் உங்க வீட்டுக்கே வந்துருவோம். வந்து வயிற்று போக்க உருவாக்குவோம். கூடவே குடல் சம்பந்தப்பட்ட நோய்களையும்.
ஐயோ வேற எங்க தாண்டா கொண்டு கொட்டுறது?
அருகில் உள்ள கசடி கழிவு சுத்திகரிப்பு நிலையத்திற்கோ கழிவுநீர் சுத்திகரிப்பு நிலையத்திற்கோ அல்லது கழிவுநீர் வடித்தல் நிலையத்திற்கோ கொண்டு செல்லப்படுவதை உறுதி செய்யுங்க. தமிழக அரசு பல இடங்கள்ல பிரத்யேக கசடு கழிவு சுத்திகரிப்பு நிலையங்களை கட்டி மழக்கழிவுகளை முழுசா சுத்திகரிச்சு திடப்பொருள்களையும் திரவத்தையும் தனித்தனியா பிரிக்கிறாங்க. நீங்க விவசாயத்திற்கும் உரமா பயன்படுத்தலாம். எந்த நோய் நொடிகளையும் தராம நாங்க உங்களுக்கு நண்பனா மாறிடுவோம்.
எனது கையால் கழுவி விட்டு வலது கையால் கூப்பிடாதே.
நமது சுகாதாரத்தையும் சுற்றுப்புறத்தையும் பாதுகாக்க மலக்கழிவுகளை முறையாகவும் பாதுகாப்பாகவும் அப்புறப்படுத்தி சுத்திகரிப்பு செய்ய வேண்டும். இல்லை என்றால் நமக்கு வயிற்றுப்போக்கு மற்றும் குடல் சம்பந்தமான தொற்று நோய்கள் ஏற்படுவதோடு குழந்தைகளின் வளர்ச்சியும் பாதிக்கப்படும்.
பொதுநலன் கருதி வெளியிடுவோர் தமிழக அரசு முழு சுகாதாரம், தமிழ்நாடு அரசு நகராட்சி நிர்வாகம் மற்றும் குடிநீர் வழங்கல் துறை.
Thank you for that. So before we move on to the Q&A, so we have two invited responses with us. We have Pete Kolsky and also Mr. Ravi Kumar Joseph. I'll briefly introduce both of them. So Pete started his career in WASH almost 50 years ago. So I don't think some of us would have born by then. So he has worked with a range of organizations on a range of things, so with different roles. And he's been with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the World Bank, and also with the University of North Carolina. He has worked in many countries in Africa and Asia. And also, I would like to highlight one important area of work, which here, I mean, basically IIHS and UNC have worked together with the foundation funded research project, which in a way looks at relative magnitudes of pathogen flows from sanitation systems, and also it helps us to inform what are the priorities that one should be aiming for when we want to control. So that's Pete, and also with us we have Ravi Kumar Joseph, who is an environmental engineer with over 30 years of experience in urban water and sanitation, and he's recently retired from the World Bank, and currently he's also working as advisor to IIHS and also independent consultant with Global Water and Sanitation Center and also with Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. He worked on urban sanitation projects in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. So Ravi's interests are broadly in water reuse, wastewater treatment and reuse, recycle, and also on city-wise inclusive sanitation. And also he's a person on the institutional side. Financial sustainability and sanitation investment is one of the key areas of work. I see Ravi has raised his hand. So Ravi, if you have anything to say, we would like to.
No, I've actually posted some questions for you and team to it's more for my own understanding. So
okay,
but address that. Thanks, sir.
Okay, we will get back on those questions per se. So let me just start with Pete. Pete, may I request you to switch on your video per se, so that people can see? Yeah. Thanks, Pete.
I think the video is there. Yes.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah. So first question is, what are some of your key reflection on this entire process of scaling sanitation, what we have done in TNUSSP, and how this is useful for the rest of the world?
Thank you, Santosh. I think it's been a great series of mini presentations that cover a lot of bases, and so I'm going to find myself reiterating, I think, some of the main points that you've made. But let me first touch on my reactions to the phrase scaling sanitation, because in general, I think we have to be very careful about the word scaling. I don't mean you, but I mean the UN or large government organizations that get excited about scaling sanitation, or indeed scaling anything. It seems to me the word has a lot of baggage. Many people think of scaling as an industrial process where you develop a prototype like the original Model T Ford. So you debug it, you get it up to snuff, and then you take that first prototype and you multiply it by 100. You see how that goes, and then you adjust it a bit, and then you go to a luck and then to a crawl. And project managers and engineers often like this sort of process. It's not easy. There's lots of problems along the way, but one can end up with a very high product distribution in a very efficient way, and it's very satisfying. Replication or scaling comes pretty easily for watches and cars. I do not for a moment believe that sanitation works this way, although perhaps it does in a few places, and that's because of my next general reflection, which fits well with the outlook of TNUSSP as you've presented it. I think the first principle for sanitation for me is that all sanitation is local. The baseline conditions, the problems, the available resources, and the general climate, physical, cultural, political, vary enormously. What works in Indonesia may not work in India. What works in Delhi may not work in Mumbai. And urban Tamil Nadu is different from rural Tamil Nadu. And there's all kinds of rural. So that leads to a third reflection or general principle, which is that you have to do what you can where you are with what you have. This was, believe it or not, a principle of guerrilla warfare, but I think it works pretty well for sanitation. And I think the development of any good strategy to increase access to safe sanitation starts with some implicit questions in that phrase. Where are we? What's the physical climate, the economic and cultural background, the traditions, the laws, the understanding, and the experience among, that's sort of where you are. What do you have? What resources are available? Human, financial, natural resources. What are we missing in terms of capacity? How can we develop our capacity to affect more change? And what can we do? What makes sense? How can we check ourselves to see we're heading in the right direction and make adjustments? How can we do more? How can we make sure that what we start sustains itself? And so that's what I think your whole presentation has in fact been about, is trying to answer those, show how you answered those questions. And I will be honest, my very first reaction in looking over the contents of the program some years back was one of confusion as to how a program to address basic urban sanitation consisted largely of bricks and mortar construction of FSTPs and sewage treatment plants, along with behavior change communication and capacity building and organizational support of masons and sludge haulers, and streamlining and updating of public service administration processes and public engagement. How the heck did this program come about? It seems, I say seems, I underline that, it only seems like a hodgepodge. But it came about from doing homework, listening very, very hard to understand local opportunities and constraints, and then developing appropriate practical interventions to address the overall problem within those opportunities and constraints. You pick and choose your battles where you can achieve the most. And so I think one of the most important things to learn, to share about it, is the program process, much more than the final content. And that is what the preceding presentations have done. So that's sort of my, rather than get into specific policies that I think are good or that I have questions about, I'm thousands of miles away, so I will miss those details. I'll get them wrong and waste people's time. But I think the fact that it's a process-driven approach to strategy development and also to the program itself is driven by processes rather than a bill of quantities. And I think that's what I want to show others. When people say, can you give me a good example of something? Now I have one. And I realize time is of the essence. So if people listening in on this don't consult any other document from the TNUSSP, I would drive them for what I found out trying to learn about the program is the document Looking Back to Look Forward, and that's on the strategy page of the TNUSSP, because I found that very helpful in understanding the process by which these things came about. I'm not sure if you're looking for more, Santosh, but
No. I think that's some of the points which you made were very important also. the idea of scaling itself is very important for us to kind of think through and say what we are trying to do. So that's very important. So I will come back to some of those things in a bit if we have time. So let me request Ravi to answer one of the key questions. So this is coming from the last one of such sessions which we did in UNC. So one of the key factors for success of TNUSSP is the investment from the government. So just to say a few things, that the investment for setting up treatment facilities or to drive the whole change, there's a substantial thing which had come from the government, the state government per se. How can financing for sanitation be strengthened in situations where particularly the government funding is constrained? So your reflections on that, Ravi. Ravi, you're muted. Please unmute yourself.
So, yeah, so the question that everyone asks is finance a limiting factor for improving urban sanitation? And if you were to just step back and look at some of the large programs of the government of India, namely JNNURM and earlier version of Amrut, they were more a question of money that was made available to the states were rather unutilized, right? So there was an issue, capacity absorption and the timeline to be able to deliver those systems. So that's one. But just to answer your question on in a resource constrained environment, what then are the options, right? So one everyone talks about is, yeah, maybe we should look at private sector, right? And have we seen private sector investments coming in for sanitation? If you look at it, at least in the context of Tamil Nadu, it's quite limited. Other than the first experiment where they brought in Alamur, where they brought in a wastewater treatment plant, which was designed and financed by a private operator. One would have thought that learning from that experience, the government would have scaled up and implemented moving forward, looked at actively pursuing private sector, but it chose not to for reasons best understood by the government. Second, even when one looks at wastewater recycle and reuse, right, where there is a potential market for the treated wastewater, and there is a client willing to pay a price. Even in those two projects which were done at scale in Chennai, the government chose to play it safe, and they went the EPC route, right? When questions were asked, why didn't you try private sector? The answer that was given was, we are trying this for the first time and we do not want to have any hiccups, and therefore, we decided that we would put in the money and then let's see how things play out. But just if you were to step back on the non-sewer sanitation, right, and we look at, especially look at the emptying services, right? It's a pretty profitable business, right? And it's not an established formal players who are in the game, mostly informal players, but they're making significant amount of money. There is money to be made. Then why not along all the other elements of the chain, right? I were to ask myself why that's not happening. One, I think it's probably maybe the size is too small, right? I mean, just to give you the context of even in the bank project, if we were to look at a sewer sanitation, I'm not speaking on behalf of the bank. I'm just talking about reflecting on what the bank used to think of, right? And so when you look at sewer sanitation and non-sewer sanitation, the level of effort which goes into preparing those projects is about the same. But the kind of investment that comes off from sewer sanitation vis-a-vis non-sewer sanitation is very small. So therefore, the reluctance even to go in there. But gladly, that is slowly changing, because we're increasingly seeing many IFIs coming and having a program which is only focused on non-sewer sanitation. So one way to probably to incentivize or get or bring some level of comfort to the private sector would be, what is the how comfortable are they with the government systems in terms of getting the payment, right? If they were to invest their money, how comfortable they would be? But just looking from what the government of India have done on the National Mission for Clean Ganga, they have been successfully be able to show that, under the hybrid annuity model, they were able to actually bring in private sector. And more importantly, I think what has happened over the last few years is that they brought in payment guarantee mechanisms. Like the World Bank has been providing a payment mechanism security for the payment that would be coming from the sovereign government. But what is shown in the last 3 projects, which were then subsequently bid out, normally for any projects of that size, you would get about 2 or 3 players bidding. But for the last 3 projects, the numbers people bidding on these projects are about 20. That tells you that, the level of comfort people get from these kind of security mechanisms, something good. And so it might be worthwhile to look at, how do we package that? How do we get that investments going? And lastly, for want of time, I think one could also look at, climate finance. Just look at, how do we monetize the carbon emission reduction that would happen, and then look at climate finance as a way and means to go. Stop yourself.
Thank you so much. Very, very useful responses, Ravi. I think they will be very relevant in cases where the countries are looking for some sort of funding. Especially this question was kind of raised during our UNC session in Africa. So very, very useful perspectives on that, I hope. So I think we are closer to the time. Abhi, what is the, do we want to continue on QA? Are there anything?
Yeah, actually, we are almost close to time.
Okay.
So we have many interesting questions, but I think we will take one more question right now live. And definitely we will get back to the people who have asked us questions. We'll stay in touch with them and get back to the answers. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, I hope we will definitely respond to the questions. Apologies for, I think we are late on certain things, but we will definitely get back to the participants' questions for sure. Yeah.
Yes. So I am directing this to Kavita and Santosh. So there is a question that how has the government brought clarity while investing in sanitation from 3 levels of governments? And what is the accountability mechanism while sharing responsibilities?
Kavita, do you want to?
Santosh, go ahead. No problem.
Go ahead. Okay. So my initial response, I think this was right. I mean, I had read this question. So largely sanitation is a state subject. And in the Indian context, the urban and rural local authorities are responsible and accountable for the outcomes, whether it is safety, sustenance, all of that. Right. So largely it's the local authorities who are responsible and accountable for many of the sanitation related things. But national and state governments are primarily, they provide resources such as finance, and state governments especially support the planning and overall management. So if it's finance, it's fairly clearly laid out. It's through programs and missions, and we have guidelines and all of that. So there is a clear whatever the mechanisms and processes in place, which I mean in a way makes accountable for different levels and players. So that's a short response, and probably a detailed one we can share with them. So I hope I have answered this question.
Thank you, Santosh. Kavita, would you like to add to this question? Otherwise, we can move on to presenting our commitment.
No, I think we can move on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to present this, because then hopefully we can answer a few more questions after the commitment. So the UN Water Conference was asked for commitments towards the UN Water Action Agenda. So this is what we're going to be presenting from IIHS side. Could we go on to the next slide? Yeah, so just to say that as you would have seen the presentation, the commitments are based on the work we've already done. And that covers many SDGs. So one of them is clean water and sanitation. SDG 6 is an obvious one, but also because we work on inclusive sanitation that touches upon SDG 5, which is gender equality, and also SDG 8 because we work with sanitation workers. It's obviously linked to health because sanitation and health are intrinsically linked. And then, of course, it also speaks to the issue of urban, so SDG 11, as well as infrastructure, SDG 9. Could we go down? So could we move on? Yeah. So very briefly, we are committing to mainstream these different forms of sanitation across the full chain. And I think Pete also spoke to this. And
focus on context-based approaches that will work. So we will continue to work with different governments. We worked with government of Tamil Nadu so far, but we'll continue to work with various governments to integrate and strengthen the mechanisms. I think a lot was talked about demonstrations and how they're important, but not as pilot projects, but demonstrations that can be scaled up. So we will continue to test and evaluate various models and innovations. There are a lot of questions around accountability and monitoring, very rightly so, very important. So we will work on them. And lastly, and most importantly, I mean, the achievements are as good as if they are being adopted by other actors and players in other regions. So we already have a very strong knowledge repository, and my colleagues will be posting a link towards the end of this session. And we will continue to strengthen that so that people can learn from our successes as well as our failures and don't repeat the same mistakes as we do. Could we go down? And we are committing to one deliverable in 2025, 2 years from now, that it would have resulted in increased access to wash and wash facilities across various geographies, not just Tamil Nadu, and transferring lessons. Yeah, so we've set ourselves an ambitious target 2 years from now. Thanks. That's all from my side. Yeah, and there's obviously, it's not just the people you saw who we were speaking, but there is a very large team behind this. And this is just to kind of acknowledge that this is really a Herculean effort with lots of team members.
Hi, thanks, Kavita. There are some interesting questions. I know we have run out of time. If everyone is okay to stay, we can take a couple of questions for about the next 10 minutes. Is that okay with the panelists?
Yeah, Abhilasha, we can do it. We can extend for another 8 minutes. And we are 32. So
yeah, okay. Thanks everyone who's able to stay to join in for 8 more minutes. That will be nice. So here is a question to the panel. What is the feedback mechanism to ensure the effective running of this decentralized sanitation management? Would one of you like to take that up?
Yeah, I will try to answer and request Niladri and Mahima to add. So I'm assuming it's about how you monitor, measure, and you make the entire system accountable, right? So and also there was a related question on has building rules implementation being effective. This is one such a subset of question that I'm assuming it's all part of it. So one of the things that we are trying to do is the on-site sanitation FSM per se was not part of the so-called roles and responsibilities of urban local authorities and all of them. So we have introduced the roles and responsibilities per se, which in a way largely addresses urban sanitation related requirements and also specifically on FSM, but it is open. So sanitation is not only FSM. So that's one part. Second is state, Tamil Nadu is one of the first states to amend the Municipalities Act to have provisions for FSM and on-site systems. So that's the second thing. So which this drives down the rest of it, what we're talking about, right? So including things such as how building rules will be implemented, who will do what, right, at different levels. So all of this is not primarily on paper, but also I think Mahima had briefly touched upon what systems will work. So the state is planning to adopt IT-based technology enables these kind of processes, right? So IT-based systems to kind of track what's happening and also feedback into the system per se for corrective measures, right? So some of the examples are how do you minimize open dumping? So some ULBs have done really fantastic work on this front. So one, it not only enhances and increases the treatment, whatever processes per se, but at the same time, it paves the way for how different stakeholders interact with each other, whether it is desludging operators or households and the officers involved in implementation. So similarly, on the on-site system improvements per se, the new constructions, so the implementation process has, I mean, we are hoping that it will get systematized, but it is in the early stages. Similarly, there are many other pieces which Mahima had presented. So I'll stop at this. I mean, Mahima and Niladri, do you want to add anything to this?
No, Santosh, I think that covers it, and we should maybe move on to another question.
Okay. Thank you, Santosh. And since we're speaking about infrastructures and our efforts towards that, there is a question about a successful strategy. So would you comment on your strategies for successful infrastructure construction and rehabilitation funding without putting water as a commodity?
Water as a commodity.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't understand this fully, but how the rehabilitation and construction was kind of done at scale and speed is that one of the things is, I mean, you have funds secured, but it is also important to think of what will work under these circumstances at scale. So we need to get those elements right. So that's one part. So how do you have these type design systems in place? And second, followed by that is that how do you ensure it is built for operations? So how do you ensure that the quality assurance happens, right? So that's the second element. In a way, the program helped in implementing these at scale, at speed also. Of course, COVID played a role in delaying a few things, but apart from that, I think quality assured implementation is the key thing. So that's where the roving support equivalent had played. But I didn't understand water as a commodity per se. Maybe it requires a little bit of clarification.
Okay, so this is, we do have more questions, but one last question for this evening. How are other stakeholders like sanitation workers being engaged for scaling sanitation? How are they involved in this effort?
There are many answers to this, and probably I'll just start. Sanitation workers are the key. I mean, they're the backbone to the entire service delivery. So without which, I mean, if you look at the full spectrum, so whether it is shared community and public toilets to desludging operations to treatment facilities, all of them. So first is, how do we ensure their working conditions are safe, right? And we have the tendency to think of safety equivalent to personal protection, right? So that's not the way the program has been thinking. It's about you approach elimination of unsafe conditions, and that's what one of the work which Pete is also doing, like understand hazards and minimize them, or don't expose yourselves to that. So that's one of the key things. And second is we have a master Niladri who can comment on. It's about how do we improve their well-being. It's not only about safety, it's also about how socially they are protected. So that's the second bit, and I would request Niladri to kind of comment on.
No, thank you, Santosh. Yeah, I mean, scaling up sanitation and considering sanitation worker is first acknowledging that yes, sanitation worker are the pivotal part of the sanitation service delivery. Then, of course, to engaging them, yes, safety part already Santosh said. Social well-being part, already in this state especially, there are multiple schemes are there, but for multiple reasons, they are unable to access those things. So there was considerable effort so that they can access those things, their well-being and social side. In parallel, their livelihood, especially lots of informal sanitation workers are also there, so that in first place, some sort of formalization, so that job card, etc., they get from certain department, and some alternative or sometimes supplementary livelihood program thing also leveraged for them, and lots of, again, that cases also lots of government existing system like say National Livelihood Mission, then other skill development, National Skill Development Authority, all this program has been leveraged. So yeah, in that way, the ultimate objective, as Santosh said, to ensure them their workplace is more safe, their well-being and social well-being is more secured.
So thank you, Niladri and Santosh, and I thank all the panelists for bringing a wide range of issues and addressing them in the question and answer session. And the questions which you have not been able to answer, we will definitely stay in touch with those who have raised the questions. We will get back to all of you. And we would like to thank everyone for patiently waiting back 10 minutes post the webinar time to kind of join in and listen to the question and answer session. And thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. Thanks a lot. Have a good day ahead.